Thank you for joining us for our YouTube live session and Q&A on theoretical minimums. We had a great response to our theoretical webinar with over 100 different registrants representing 30 different countries. So before we get started, I'd like to highlight the link to our theoretical minimums resource library. So there you'll be able to find today's webinar, several different articles on theoretical minimums, and a white paper on the topic. So now, getting down to the business at hand, we're planning today on hosting a live Q&A for approximately 15 minutes. So let us take our first question. So first question is, what exactly is a science of theoretical minimums? Is it a formula? Is it a simulation tool? Or is it a theoretical framework?
David, you want to take this one?
Sure. So the science of theoretical minimum was developed as a methodology. In fact, it was a methodology that can be used to help with a firm and successive trading partners in a supply chain to help them for their competitive advantage. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the competitive advantage with theoretical minimums, Wesley?
Sure. I think while it's an excellent operationalization of a tool and a software approach, really it's probably a little more transformative in that it is a shift in a strategy. And so on one side it is a model and it is a tool, but we think it is also kind of this inculcation of a competitive strategy where you're really looking very, very closely at all your assets and trying to figure out how those assets are working for you. And so it drives this overall shift that we see from a return on sales or return on revenue to a return on asset model. Out that time, you really start to free up working capital.
And what we've done is we've taken that construct and instantiated it into our approach as we work with customers and into the way we look at and solve problems in the supply chain with our solutions.
So let me ask you this. So as you're working with your customers, do you think that this is actually also trying to help move that culture forward from what we were doing towards this return on asset? Does the tool actually help move forward in that kind of a culture change?
Absolutely. If you have the right people involved. That's always the key, right?
Yeah, but we've seen that.
Yeah, exactly. But what we do is we provide the information, we provide the ability to take advantage of this change, of this mindset, of really looking at understanding what the return is on those assets and how you can leverage that and improve. We give you the information in a format and in a way that you can take action. But it's always incumbent on the users to take that action.
Okay, makes sense.
Great, thank you. So our second question is, how is the science of theoretical minimums different from multi-echelon inventory optimization and network design?
It sounds like a Dr. Nowicki question to me.
Well, I can address that. In terms of this, as we mentioned a moment ago, the science of theoretical minimums is really a methodology, and part of that methodology are some underlying mathematics, some underlying algorithms that address the inventory. Now, we have inventory models that are in there. That's not the centerpiece of the science of theoretical minimums, whether there's multiple different types of inventory modeling techniques, item-based, system-based techniques, of which multi-echelon is a system-based technique. It's not so important in terms of the underlying mathematical models, but provide a methodology that will act as a catalyst for firms to focus on theoretical minimums. And that's what the science of theoretical minimums really intent is to provide a strategy or a focus for firms to address and reduce and understand the theoretical minimums.
From a CFO perspective, what this ends up meaning is that typically we are given purchase order processing times and we're given delivery dates based on that, which we've discussed. Some of that is broken down into real lead time, physical lead time, and some of that's just delay. What this allows us to do from a multi-echelon perspective is to begin to understand that what our suppliers are giving us is actually also composed of physical lead time and informational delay. And so it begins to allow us to go be interested in managing beyond my first tier supplier. But in reality, I can begin to quantify what is the impact of my first tier supplier's approach for physical and informational delay. So it allows you to, at the very least, be able to quantify what is that in terms of cash, working capital. And then you can make a decision that taking actions to free up that cash is either good or bad. But at least now we know at a second tier, third tier, fourth tier, we can see how that all begins to come together to represent the delay from my current supplier and how much of my supplier's price is based on these delays from all of their suppliers.
Great, thank you, gentlemen. Our next question, why has there been a focus on demand variability rather than lead times?
Well, I think when you start taking a look at some of the, the modeling techniques that have been put forth and studied and used within industry, quite often people talk about demand during lead time, and they talk about variability of demand during lead time. And the reality is what they really focus in on is exclusively the variability of demand and not the variability of lead time. So they combine the two of them together when they're analyzing demand during lead time, but they really only focus on the variability of demand. So what the science of theoretical minimums and the supporting modeling techniques allow you to do is allow you to quantify the financial impact of not only demand variability, but also lead time variability. And when you start taking a look at the two of those, we also have some capability that allows you to look at the dependencies between demand and between lead time, between demand variability and lead time variability, and also, again, provide some financial metrics to help influence decisions to reduce the volatility both in demand and in lead time.
I think part of back to the original question, why more focus is put on demand variability is because there are more tools out there right now to do that. There are a lot of software companies who focus on that, and it's an easy project to sell because you say, if I understand my demand variability, I have a better forecast, I can do a better job of managing inventory and all that. And so that's been a very simple process to look at. And there have been no, I think Leslie earlier used the term advocacy on lead times and on dwell times. And I think this is the first time that someone's really said, okay, we really need to understand all these dwell times and all these processing times and what it means and how it translates across the supply chain. And so it's a new framework, a new way of thinking about it. 10 years from now, everyone's going to say, of course. Right. But right now it's new and it's different. And I think that's the change.
Yeah. And I think from my perspective, and I tend to think of things from a CFO perspective, just based on my background. From my perspective, what we've done is most of us have been part of standing up an ERP. And I think there's research that suggests that up until about 2008, that was probably on average, was not a good investment in some cases. And what we saw during those times is folks came to us with an ERP that had embedded in those business rules, and they expected us to adapt our culture to that set of business rules, when in fact it probably didn't make sense for us and for our culture, and we struggled. The difference here is this software makes us stop and understand what we are doing, and it brings insight into what's the variability into demand. And at the same point, because of the complicated math that's behind the scenes, we can clearly see that part of the formula that is contributing to the total cost that's built based on variability during lead time and during transportation, or variability during order processing. And so now those things that were kind of ignored because that's in the math, we can then use the tool that's instantiated in their software to understand what happens if I reduce that demand during lead time. All of a sudden, it's a significant cost savings. And so what we see is we've got a software that is coming in that isn't directing our business process. It's essentially helping us see the cost of doing business better. That allows us to figure out what are we doing and what's the total cost implications for a lot of things we've ignored.
Exactly.
So our next question is on that same topic, so maybe you can just elaborate a little bit more. How does the science of theoretical minimums help with finding where the opportunities are?
Very simply, I mean, it's a framework that allows us, it's a methodology, it's an approach, it's an instantiation. But there's a framework that allows us to break down the problem very simply in a way that we can see where the impacts are. And then as we put it into the model, you can start seeing the cost of each of those areas. And that's across not just your process, but your supplier's process, tier 1, tier 2, et cetera. And that's what makes it a powerful tool, because we've simplified it in such a way that we can model it effectively and see the cost.
Yeah, and so if you're using the tool, you can see normally these models are based on some sort of assumption that folks did. Then there's an executive briefing, and half the people in the room are mentally going, I don't agree with assumptions. In this case, we can use the tool to drive even that executive level discussion and go, what's our assumption on the transportation variability? If it's this, here's the consequence. If it's that, here's the consequence. And we can use these levers to shape that conversation. And in some cases, we find out something we thought was really important. It's not important for these kinds of SKUs. In other cases, stuff we said, no big deal. We don't need to worry about my supplier's lead time variation or the fact it's 6 weeks for a PO. All of a sudden, we begin to realize it does matter when we run it through the algorithm.
And actually, we'll show that a little bit in an upcoming webinar in the series.
Great. Our next question. Enterprise silos are obviously a problem. Does the science of theoretical minimums help with that, or what do you recommend?
I think, once again, what the science of theoretical minimums does is it does provide a methodology, and a methodology for firms to focus on lead times, for firms to focus in on demand, and the combination of both of those for variability. So whether it's a lead time for your individual firm or for trading partners across the supply chain, it allows you to have high-level conversations for financial impacts of reduction in lead times, whether it's informational or physical lead times. So again, the tool and the underlying methodology essentially acts as an excuse for you to communicate with your trading partners to understand the financial implications of having a tighter collaboration in the hopes of reducing the informational delays.
Yeah, and I think I would just add to that is it's really rather agnostic, to be honest, with regard to silos. All it does is it shows you there may be efficiencies gained by working in silos that make a lot of sense, but it shows you the implications for the dwell time of after the fact integrating between silos. That just leaves you to do the decisions that we should make. Does that make sense for us? And so it just allows us to quantify. So in some cases, it may make sense to leave the silos. I mean, we frequently say, oh, we've got to break down the silos. Maybe not, but at least we can quantify what is the cost of that integration that is occurring post hoc between silos.
And what we've done with our approach and with our software is we eliminate silos just by the very nature of the fact that we treat every problem as a multi-party, multi-enterprise problem. And because of that, the silos themselves go away in the solution. Where there's advantage to having silo-owned processes, they can still do that, but the information flow is seamless across. And that's really what we're trying to get to, is eliminating that, the dwell times, the lag times, and allowing each part of the process to be as efficient as it possibly can, and keeping that information real time across the entire process.
Great, thank you. We have time for one more question. So here's a nice one for a wrap up. So do you have any recommendations for supply chain professionals on where they can start learning and applying the science of their theoretical minimums?
So we've put out an article together based on the work we've done with One Network through the research that we do at the University of North Texas. So that's available, I think, on the websites here. We are also continuing to work in this area. And so we welcome collaboration in that area. We're bringing forth some of these mathematical models into some follow-on publications. And then there's obviously your work.
Yeah, obviously, One Network, this is something that we're focused on. And if you want to engage us to help you with any process, we're more than happy to get involved and look at your situation and see if there's an opportunity for us to work together.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the questions today. We're going to wrap up now. So again, as a reminder, we provided the link to our resource library that can provide more information on theoretical minimums. Also want to let you know that we have at One Network a webinar series, and next Thursday we'll be featuring APAS, and that will focus on the power of business networks. If you're interested in registering or learning more about that, you can go to the One Network homepage